Morning, Bud.
Morning,
Do
Congressman.
the sort of important work here in terms of creating a record for today's tape. So today is June 30th, 2015. I am interviewing Edwin Atkins at New London Public Library in New London, Connecticut. The interviewer is myself, Congressman Joe Courtney, 2nd District of Connecticut, working with Central Connecticut State University. Also today, in terms of organizing this tape, is Buck Morgan from Central Connecticut State University, Ryan McKenna from my office, Ayanti Grant from my office, and we also have the New London Youth Services program here with some of the young students that are, agreed to join us here today.
Good.
So again, why don't we get started?
Yes, sir.
And, so good morning. You want me to call you Bud or Edwin?
Bud is better. I've never gone by Edwin in my life.
Well, why don't we start there? We'll talk a little bit about your family and where you were born and where you received the name Edwin, and then just sort of kind of take us up to when you joined the military.
Certainly. I was born in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. My father was in the National Guard. He came from Canada and was in the National Guard and was the top sergeant in the National Guard at 120th Field Artillery when they had horses. And then in 1941, when they called the 32nd Division to active role, he got sick and he didn't go. And so later on, in 43, he went into the Navy and went into the Seabees and spent 2 years in Aleutians. My other brothers, I had one that went in 43. He ended up with 29 years of service as a combat engineer in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And he just died last year as a full colonel. I had another brother that went in the paratroopers in 45. He did 20 years and he was a sergeant first class. My other brother spent 20 years in the Army as a sergeant major, and he was in the Vietnam War. And so that's my family type.
Pretty amazing family of military service for
Yes,
the
sir.
country. So again, so when were you born? What year was you?
I was born in 1934, and when I was a freshman in high school, I joined the Wisconsin National Guard. They knew how old we were. We were 15 years old at the time, and that was in 1949. And then the Korean War came, and they were worried about the 32nd was going to get activated again, and what they were going to do with it. There was about 5 of us that were in the National Guard, and we were drilling on weekends. We were getting ready to go, and whether they were going to discharge us or take us with us. And I got discharged in 53 when I started college up in La Crosse.
Great. So, and how did you find your way to the Navy?
And I was getting drafted, and I says, I do not want to be living in a foxhole and in the dirt. And I says, well, I'll join the Navy. So what happens? I joined the Navy, and then I said, well, I'll go in the submarine force, where I didn't know you couldn't shower or shave for months at a time.
So what year was that when you joined the Navy?
In February of 54, I joined the Navy and went to boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, where it was pretty cold. And then I volunteered for submarines and reported to Groton in July. Finished sub school. I was about the middle of the class. So I didn't really put my mind to it that I wanted to be at the top of the class. And then I got transferred to Hawaii and put to Oahu and reported aboard the Oahu that was in the shipyard at that time. And we had Captain Anderson, who was the second skipper of the Nautilus that took it on the ice. He was our CO at the time.
So again, we're talking here today in New London, Connecticut, which is the home of the modern day nuclear navy, and yes. Submarines go undersea for months at a time.
Right.
They can go forever as long as there's food. But obviously, submarines were a lot different back in those days, because some of them weren't nuclear submarines, the ones that you just described. And maybe
right.
You could sort of, because a lot of people don't know much about submarines and right. how the difference of the older models versus the modern ones, and what it was like being a sailor on the older ones versus the modern ones. So
on Oahu, we had one engine.
That was a diesel electric.
That was a diesel electric. We had 4 pancake engines. They were GM engines, and they were trying out. to see if they'd work, and they never worked. So we would stand a watch in the torpedo room. We'd be back changing headers on the engines, trying to get it going. And on those type of submarines, you could only be down for so long because you had a battery, and the battery would be discharged. So you'd have to come up again and either charge your battery, or we had a snorkel on that one. But then when I went on the Corsair and the Conger, was an old fleet boat submarines that they were using during World War II, and there was no snorkel on there, so you really had to come up. They were like a surface craft.
Right. So how many hours could they go underwater?
Probably a day if you weren't drawing a lot out of the battery.
Okay. And you said earlier you didn't have some of the comforts that modern submarines. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Right, because your showers. You didn't have much water, so you loaded your showers up with food, potatoes, and whatever else, and you ate your way through. We had no washing machines, so you couldn't wash your clothes. You took 3 pair of dungarees, one where you'd go out there for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, change your dungarees, and then you had a clean pair when you came back in. You sponge bathed yourself with any water you could or alcohol just to keep clean. Everybody stunk, so it didn't matter.
So, and how many sailors were on board at one of the old?
About 75.
So 75 weren't showering, or so it must have gotten a little. It must have been pretty cramped too.
But, right, it was cramped, but we didn't. Everybody smelled the same. So, and you had that diesel fuel, the diesel smell on you when you got off that submarine, and your clothes were permeated with that diesel smell. You never got rid of it. We still can smell ourselves on it.
And did they have bed space for all 70?
Right, we had on those we had bed space for them. We didn't have to hot bunk. With the new ones, on the atomic ones, and that you've got a hot bunk where you have 3 people using 2 bunks. When one guy got up, the guy coming off watch went and got in the bunk.
So you had to share the.
Well, you shared them.
Yeah.
It's just.
Yeah. And how much room did you have when you like laid down on a bed in the old subs? I mean, were you kind of.
The old subs, we slept in the torpedo room. You had 18 bunks in the torpedo room. You were sleeping with the torpedoes. So you had a little room on that. Right. But in the after battery or in the stern room, you didn't have really any room because you were bunking about 50 people in one space. So you didn't turn over or anything on that.
And how long were the deployments when you went out on the?
30 to 60 days.
Wow. Yeah.
Doing a run.
And so when you were on those boats, it was in Hawaii? It was where you were?
And we would go out to Westpac. We'd go out to Japan, Formosa, and do our patrols. We were doing patrols off Korea and wherever else we were. Some places we were.
Great. And so what kind of work did they have you doing on the boats?
I was a torpedo man, and we kept the weapons up, and we stood watches, plane watches, and such.
And how many torpedoes were on a submarine?
We usually carried about 18 in the torpedo room, and in the after room you had another 6 or 8.
Right. So when you had to move them around, how did you guys do that?
That was with manual. You pushed them, and when you were loading them in, you were usually back to back. You had one guy pushing the tail section, and another guy was back to you pushing them in, or you use an out-haul line.
Right. And did you get to test fire them at all?
We'd fire exercise shots all the time and keep our warheads up just in case we needed them.
Right. So at some point, the older diesels started to get phased out, and then the new nuclear subs came.
Right. Back in '59, when they started building the first nuclear submarines and started building the FBMs, and they took the first skipjack class and George Washington made those FBMs. They cut them in half and put a section in there for the missiles, 16 missile tubes.
Right. So those could go longer, right?
Those would go on a patrol for 60 to 70 days, right. And they could stay submerged.
The whole time.
The whole time, but they would come up for burn passes to check to see exactly where they were.
And how many sailors were on those boats?
You were running about 125, so 130. A lot more guys.
Yeah, no women on subs back in those days.
No women on submarines, yeah. But now they're coming. They're there. They're doing a great job. Yeah. So I just and now with the Tridents, they're carrying about 150 to 175 people on them.
Right. So so again, the new nuclear subs, which could run longer, were coming on. And so can you talk about which subs you served on and what kind of rank you had when you were on board?
I was when I went down to Pascagoula when they put the Ingalls Shipbuilding was building their first nuclear sub. They had built the Bonefish, and that was their first one. They did. And then they built the Sculpin, and I was down there in '59, and I was a first class torpedoman, and stayed on. We launched the Sculpin, and we went to Mare Island for a PSA. That's post shakedown availability, and we stayed in Mare Island. We were known as the San Pablo Raider because we had problems with our prop, and we would go from Mare Island out the sound out through the San Francisco underneath Golden Gate Bridge every weekend for a month. So that's why they call us the San Pablo Raider. And then in '63, I volunteered and went to launcher school where they were taking torpedomen and making them launcher torpedomen to work on the launchers for the FBMs. And that's when I reported to the Daniel Webster at EB and put the Daniel Webster in commission.
Right. So now you live in Connecticut these days, not Wisconsin. So did that just sort of happen over time as you were?
Over time, when I started, we bought a house in about '65 in Connecticut, and I stayed there till I was till in 1986 when I went out to Bangor with the Alabama and became the Group 9 Command Master Chief out in Bangor, Washington.
When you say we bought a house, who's we?
My wife, Fran.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah.
yeah. So she's been with you at all
Been here all the time.
How many deployments really did your family have to kind of go through in terms of different parts of the country?
They were great. We only stayed in Groton
Is that right?
for 20 years, and then when I went out to Bangor for good, the wife went with me, and the kids had already gone to college, and so the wife went with me out to Bangor, and then EB brought me back after I retired, and I went to work at EB.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously during that whole time period, there was obviously a lot of sort of tension with the Soviet Union, who had built up its nuclear navy at that time. And maybe you could just sort of talk about what it was like serving on a submarine during the Cold War with Russia.
During the Cold War, if we were operating in the Med, we had to be very quiet. Everybody was looking for us, and we would find a spot and just hide. And then we could hear them looking for us. And sometimes at night we had to come up for a burn pass or star fix to find out exactly where we were. So we had our missiles pinpointed wherever we could do that. And if you came up in the State 5C, the waves would come over the missile deck, and it was so big, it would suck you right up. So then you'd have to pump yourself, get the boat real heavy, and then if you lost it, down you'd go and you'd try to get rid of it. You couldn't blow it because you were making noise. So you might pirouette down to 180 feet by the time you recovered your depth and go back up again. So it was
the Mediterranean Sea?
Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah.
And we're up here in the North Atlantic. That is a rough sea up there too. And it's tough coming up to periscope depth on those things. And I was a diving officer, so I was pumping and blowing and pumping and blowing and flooding and trying to keep that thing on depth.
So a lot of your work obviously was pretty top secret and classified, but I mean, since the end of the Cold War anyway, there's been some, more public discussion about what it meant to be, in a submarine during the Cold War. I mean, so when you say they were looking for you, were there Russian subs that were out there?
Russian subs, Russian surface craft were out looking for us, and we were just hiding. And we had our fast attacks would sweep us to make sure there wasn't a Russian around there. The Russians on all our ports had a ship out there, a boat out there watching us to see when we left, so they could tell people, hey, they're leaving port. Yeah. So we worked out of Rota, Spain, right. Holy Loch, Scotland, and Charleston. We ran patrols out of Charleston. Right. And I made 20 patrols during the Cold War.
And how long was a patrol?
It was 60 to 70 days. Right. And what you do, you'd come in, the other crew would relieve you, and then you'd fly back to the States. You'd get a little R&R, and you'd lose about a third of your crew, so you'd have to train up again and back out again and relieve that crew, and they would come home.
Right. So were there any sort of close calls or anything like that, or?
We had a lot of close calls, a lot of some flooding and things, but we don't talk about that.
Right.
The only thing I will talk about, we were on a R&R in Kauai, in Hawaii, and we got caught in a tidal wave, and and the captain didn't know whether he was going to go out of the harbor, in the harbor, or tie up the freighter. By the time he decided that he was going to go out of the harbor, the tidal wave came by, sucked all the water out of the harbor. We went down to the bottom, and then when the water came back, it rolled us right over about 9 degrees. 2 guys were topside. They jumped over the side. 1 guy got washed up on a harbor buoy. The Coast Guard came in and got him off. The other guy got washed up ashore. Tourists were taking his picture. The waves would come in and grab him again, take him back out. That happened 3 times till the Coast Guard come running and pulled this guy out.
Wow. So, again, your ranks obviously went up the food chain there as time went along. So,
Right.
So what was your final rank when you left?
My final rank was I was a Command Master Chief out at Bangor. I was a Group 9 Command Master Chief. And prior to that, I was Chief of the Boat of the Alabama, which is the senior enlisted guy.
Yeah.
Same with the Michigan, I was a senior enlisted guy. Kamehameha, senior enlisted guy.
And when you say senior enlisted guy, is that like a sergeant in the Army?
It's like a sergeant major.
Right.
You worked for the captain,
Right.
and you took care of your crew.
So, that's a pretty lot of responsibility.
It is.
In terms of,
Yeah.
You're the guy that everybody trusts.
Right.
And so were captains sort of coming and going when you were in that
Well,
position?
about every 3 years.
Yeah.
Every 3 years. Same with the XO.
Yeah.
About every 3 years that they would go and then they'd go off. And if it was an XO, he'd get a command and he'd leave.
Right. So, and were you involved at all in terms of any of the training of sailors?
Involved in all facets of a sailor's life.
Yeah.
Liberty, training, pay.
And it's a different kind of service than the rest of the Navy or the rest of the military, for that matter.
Right,
You
we're
kinda
about-
need to be a special person. To
But
do that.
we're about 2% of the Navy.
2%.
A lot of people cannot make the submarine force.
And you saw that over time, is that people just weren't cut out for it?
They'd go to sub school and they just weren't cut out to it, or you'd get them on the boat and they just could not qualify.
Yeah.
So you'd work with them and work with them. Finally, you just have to say, well, you just are not cutting it, so we're going to have to put you back in a surface craft.
Right. And did some of them struggle with just sort of being in a submarine and
A lot of them do. Claustrophobic, they get claustrophobic and they can't take being away from their families, and it's just...
because there's no communication.
No community. When we were going, there was you get a family gram where you could get 15 words. You'd get about 10 family grams. But now with communication and all that, they can talk to their families. It was a lot different when we went to sea. Now they don't go out and really hide. But if they're going out patrol, they're doing special ops. Well, then it's the same way. They're out there hiding.
So you said when you what year was it when you finally hung up the
February of 1988.
And go ahead.
That was Navy was 35 years, and I had another 4 years in National Guard, and with the time that gave me the 40 years.
40 years. And that was just about the end of the Cold War. So.
End of the Cold War, and
Yeah.
it was time to go. I was tired. It was time to go home.
So, and you said Electric Boat hired you, and that's why you came back here?
They hired me, and I came back into engineering and I stayed there for 2.5 years, and then they had a layoff.
Right.
And so then I went in STO working on the systems.
Right. So you've been very active in terms of veterans, activities of every sort. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, a lot. Sometimes we go to an honor program where we go into the working with VITAS and working with the veterans. They honor the veterans. They have a program, and so I'm involved with that. I'm involved with subvets. I'm also the national chairman for the Holland Club, which is members that are qualified in submarines for 50 years. And it's a great organization. As you know, you were there and honored these people.
Right. So again, there's a lot of veterans groups like American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Disabled American Veterans, but the sub-vets are again sort of their own separate veterans group.
They are, yeah.
And they're located right here in this region.
Right, in Groton, Connecticut, we have 1,800 members. We're the biggest sub-vets organization that we have. We've got 12,000 members, and we've got 1,800 of them, and we also have our own clubhouse.
Right. And you do work to help some of the sailors that are over at the Groton sub base today, is that right?
And what some of us, we do the towing of the boats at all the graduations, the basic sub school, officers graduations. We're also guest speakers at the TM graduations and the ET's graduations. And we're there. Wherever they need us, we're there.
And sometimes you help with holidays when the guys are.
In the holidays, we have a Thanksgiving where we feed all the sub sailors. We feed about 1,800 people on Thanksgiving, and we have a lot of volunteers.
Right.
They can't go home, so we entertain them at our clubhouse, and they really enjoy it. Because we have to pay back to them, because when we have the 4th of July parade, they carry our flags, lost boat flags. When we have memorials, they come to the Flashing Memorial, and they're there holding the flags for us. So we have to pay these sailors back, the kids back.
So, well, thank you again for your amazing service, and it's a great story. You've got a wonderful family, and do you have any sort of closing remarks that you'd like to share about, particularly if you've got young people, about the importance of serving in the military and whether or not it's serving in the Navy or the submarine?
Well, it's very important if they do go into. It doesn't matter what service they go into. It's just to serve. Even if you go in for 2 years or 3 years, you're doing a little service to your country. You don't have to stay in, but it's good training for you. You know how to do things and how to act and be on your own, which is good. And I think everybody should have to go into service for at least a couple of years. And now with the women in the submarines, which is a new deal, I think it's going to work out, because we're losing these universities, the engineering degrees. We're the males. We're not getting them all, and we need these women in our submarine service.
And there are also benefits in terms of education benefits.
Education benefits if you go in the military, even if you go in the National Guard, the state will pay for your college education. And there's a lot of people that cannot afford the college education. You go into service and you can get your education. I'd like to talk a little bit about our Great Lakes trip when they opened the St. Lawrence Seaway in '59. I was on the Conger, and we went up the St. Lawrence Seaway, and we spent a little time in New York, and then we started going through the locks, and we'd have to wait till we could get through the locks, because they had a lot of ships that were waiting there, and we'd be at nighttime waiting to go through a lock. We'd have the lines tied, and we'd have them on the capstan, the after and forward capstan, and we'd have the line down in the room, the after torpedo room or the forward torpedo room, with our phones on, and they said, okay, let's go. So up we'd go through the locks. And if we were up there a long time, we had the duty cook would come up with hot dogs and that, and help us out. We also had a duty waivers section that if we were going through the canals and things and people were waving at us, we'd say the duty waivers topside, and they would come up and they would be waving to these people. And so we some of the places we stopped at: Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We were in there for 4 days. We also went to Duluth, Minnesota, and we went into Cleveland. And Cleveland, we were tied up right downtown. And that's when they brought the cod in. They were changing out the old fleet boat, and the cod is still there as a museum. And we furnished the line handlers for the cod. And so
I don't think there's been too many submarines that have gone up to the Great Lakes before, right? That must have been a pretty rare event.
It was a really rare event, because they brought 4 submarines in there at the time, and then the following year they brought 1, because they've only could bring in diesel boats. The yacht Britannica with the Queen, they were in there. They brought the cruiser Macon was in there, and we fired torpedoes in all expendable torpedoes at the Macon in all 5 Great Lakes, which was something different.
So a nuclear sub couldn't make that
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't allow a nuclear submarine in there anymore because the depth and going through the locks, and it's not a good deal.
Right. So coming from Wisconsin, that must have been kind of fun.
It was great. Tied up in Milwaukee, and I was 100 miles from home, and so I went home for a couple of days, and my relations came down and visited the submarine, and here I am.
Yeah. Show it all off.
Show it all off.
Yeah, that's great. Speaking of that, so your family in Wisconsin, I mean, how was that in terms of trying to stay in touch and communicate over the years?
Well, it was good because if you had a landline, so you could call them and see how they were doing, or go home on leave or on that stuff.
Right. The Midwest has actually supplied a lot of sailors for the Navy because of the Chicago Navy Yard, right?
Right. Yeah, the Great Lakes Training Center, and that's the only boot camp that is in the Navy right now.
Right.
And another trip we made when we came out on the Wahoo, when we came out of the shipyard, we went down to Tahiti, and we were the first submarine that had been in Tahiti in years. So we had a good trip in Tahiti. And the Wahoo, another one, they cut it in half and they put a 10-foot section in it, and they got rid of these pancake engines that we had, and they put in Fairbanks that they had in the regular submarines. And another good trip we had was on the Michigan when we went through the canal. So we went through the Panama Canal on the Michigan, and at that time things were kind of tight, so we had 3 riverboats that escorted us with Navy SEALs on. So we'd be cooking topside. We were cooking hamburgers stuffed topside, and the Navy SEAL boats would come up, and we'd toss them the hamburgers. We'd cook the hamburgers and toss them to soda and things because it was kind of tight in there. And if something happened, there wasn't any way we could defend ourselves. That's why we had the Navy SEAls with us on that.
And so the Panama Canal's deep enough and big enough to handle
right.
it.
Yes. Yeah. And that's where all the Tritons they go through there now.
I guess they're going to widen this.
They're trying to widen it now. And the Michigan that I was on, they took out the nuclear weapons and they made it an SSGN where you got Tomahawk missiles, and they've been firing them too. Plus they can carry about 60 Navy SEALs with them. So now they're a good line of defense for the United States. And these 4 boats are going to run out of their time, and they're going to have to replace them at some time. The same with all the Tritons. They're going to have to replace them and find money to replace these things.
Well, you, again, have done a good job of, educating public officials about, how important that is.
Right.
Yeah. So, and the sub-vets do that as well, right?
Right. We try that all the time we can.
Yeah.
And as you see, if you come down to the museum, in Groton, they just did a new NR1 exhibit down there, and that you kids should go there and see that Force Museum. Yeah. It's a great educational tool.
Right. And you're a frequent visitor there.
I'm a docent there. I stand watches there about twice a month, educating the people that come in and have questions for us.
That's great. Well, thank you again for all you do in this community.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
No,
well, maybe
but my kids were good because I would leave, the wife would take over the mending of the children, and then when I got back, I just took over again. I had a strong wife. She was the chief of the boat's wife. She had to take care of all the other wives. They would be calling her, how do you do this, how to do that. And she was the chief of the boat's wife for 3 tours that I had. Plus, she was also, when I was at Group 2, she was still the bondsman for Group 2 plus Group 9. So the kids grew up. They did a good job. And when I got home, I'd be working on the football fields, just like I'd never left before. And it was great. I'd get home and go right to the football game. And we had a couple of guys that were in Ledyard when my son was in Ledyard, that they were sending family grams, so they would pick off the scores, so we knew what the Ledyard was doing, whether they're winning or losing. Yeah. So we kept in touch that way, so it worked out.
But did you have to miss some sort of...
I missed birthdays, I missed graduations, I missed a lot. And it's a good thing had a granddaughter that I got to see and did everything with a granddaughter, which is,
Yeah.
it worked.
Well, that's part of military service.
It
that a lot
is.
of people don't sort of, think about.
And you either have strong wives or the wives just cannot take it. So they just want a divorce or they want him to get out. So a lot of guys have to get out of the service because their wives tell them they got to get out.
Now that we have women sailors, now
It's going to be different because the husbands are going to tell the women to get out. It's just. Yeah. My son wanted to go in the Navy as he was going to be a pilot, and he was down in Pensacola and he had high blood pressure. So he flunked out of there, but otherwise he'd have been a Navy pilot. The daughter did not want to have anything to do with sailors. Not a thing. She wouldn't even go to the base. And Jim, the son was in the swimming pool, golfing. They'd call me up. They'd say, "Hey, your son snuck on the golf course again." So I'd have to talk to him and say, "You can't do that. They know you too well." Yeah, he tried. So, well, the reason I picked the Navy because my other three brothers were in the Army.
Oh.
And I didn't want to be in the Army. So that's why I picked the Navy, because I wanted to be able to sleep in clean sheets and shave and shower every day. But then when I picked submarine force, that all went out the window. It really went out the window. And I grew a beard. I had a beard. We could grow beards because you didn't have water to shave anyway. So I grew a beard on patrol on the FBM. I grew a beard. I'd come home, the kids said, "Get rid of that." So I'd have to shave when I got home.
Right. Well, it's pretty obvious why you got into the Connecticut Veterans Hall of Fame for just an amazing life and record, and you're still at it, which is really very inspiring. So maybe we'll give them all a round of applause here.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin.